Welcome, everyone, to Los Libertinos podcast. I am your host, Carlos Abelard, and this is Chingazos and Fire, episode Juan, number 11. My guest today is Andrew from the Popular Liberty podcast, and most importantly, he is the inventor of archotropism, a term that he coined. And to me, so far, it's a framework or field of play from where each wielder or wealth creator scores inevitable goals of power over weaker opponents over time and distance, consolidating more strength with more goals scored. And the game is held together by the natural laws and principles of thermodynamics. That's my interpretation. I probably fucked that up. We will see, and we will get into it for sure with Andrew. Welcome, Andrew.
Carlos, it's great to be here.
Yeah, man.
That was pretty good.
Yeah, I told you offline, I'm a sports guy, so sometimes I gotta connect these things in that kind of way. But that's the way, basically, how I see it. I see some of these people scoring goals, and as they score a goal and they get the ball back, the ball isn't the regular size; it's bigger now. It has a little bit more. But anyway,
that's exactly right. Yeah, game theory is exactly the way to think about. It's the game theory of power.
Yeah,
this is how it works.
Perfect. So we will get into all of that, and but before we get into that, I always say that like half my audience is libertarian, and the other half is primos, cousins, tíos, illegals, all kinds of people. Taco eaters, whatever. Right? Actually, everybody's taco eaters now, but. I'd like to have you introduce yourself and give a background, your family, where you grew up, kind of what you do, and where your path in your life kind of led you to a point where around 2017, you started formulating these ideas and started thinking about putting, your thoughts to paper and started coming up with your idea of archotropism. And then also kind of put in there how and why you think you're a robot in that intro.
Am I a robot? Still kind of human mostly, but my background is, I went to I was raised Catholic, and I went to a private evangelical Bible school for 12 years, and had a Bible class for an hour every single day, and I had youth group on Saturday, most Saturdays, from middle school to high school, and I had mass on Sunday, and I barely ever missed it. So basically, I was really immersed in the Bible and the Word of God, and that was really what brought me to libertarianism. So I always had like kind of a natural libertarian instincts, like, we really shouldn't be trying to punish or tax or outlaw these, like degeneracy and all these other things that, Christians today really want to do, but those weren't done in the Bible. God never did that. And, my evangelical upbringing at the school really taught me a lot about, the way God thinks about, morality. And it was really meditation on a whole lot of these subjects on the Bible that, and applying them to, my real life around 2017 that made me realize realize that the rules of archotropism were related to thermodynamics, which have a little bit of a science background, just a little bit, but and I just noticed them over and over and over again. I couldn't stop noticing them, and so I had kind of formulated my thesis about power, but by around 2017, I hadn't really quite put it down into defined in words yet, but I did. That was around there that I really first put it into words and first started talking about it to people, and I kept quiet about it a little bit because at the time in late 2017, maybe 2018, it's like I had 2017, I think. I discovered Dave Smith, and I'd already been calling myself a libertarian. Yeah, but it wasn't because of Ron Paul, because I was too young at the time. I'm only in my late 20s. So but I'd already started calling myself a libertarian before, like kind of a minarchist, but before I found Dave Smith. But when I found him and he got me reading Rothbard and Mises and eventually Hoppe. And that was basically from there. Hoppe was kind of the last thing. That was really the one that drew all the pieces together. Because I'd seen that the laws were kind of disjointed, except for the thermodynamics ones. Those were pretty obvious. I just didn't quite know how to word them at the time. But the but when Hoppe started talking about time preference, and and relating that's when everything clicked to me about because Christianity has the same idea in the concept of humility, and as a cardinal virtue, or not cardinal, but I think that's a spiritual virtue, and we have the same concept there, and they're different, but they're very, very, very similar.
It put it together for you. It put it together for you.
Yeah, that was like the last piece, and that was when I really completed the archotropism framework. It was after I read Hoppe, the Democracy of the God That Failed, and and that was where that came from.
Yeah, and what does your family now? You said you kept quiet. What is your family, your loved ones, do you even bring it up to them? Is it something that you don't even? What do you get into with that? Because that's I mean, are you that vato that shows up to the Thanksgiving and starts bringing up archotropism, or you keep that to yourself?
No, I shut up about politics. I used to when I was a lot younger. I didn't talk about archotropism, but I would argue the libertarian point of view, and I still consider myself something of a libertarian. I call myself a praxian because that's kind of the term that Mises used about praxeology. It's a kind of an Austro term, but I'm not quite a libertarian, but my framework really does rely heavily on the praxeology of Austro-libertarianism. So
okay, and for anyone that doesn't know what praxeology is, what is that?
It's like the methodology. I'm going to butcher this. Let me just get a decent definition. I'm going to butcher this.
No, you got to freestyle it, vato. It's all right. You can butcher it all you want.
No, it's a study of human action and conduct. Thank you. I just didn't want to butcher it. That's what my ideas really rely heavily on. So that's what I kind of started calling myself.
All right,
human action.
All right, fair enough. So yeah, we'll get into this. Some stuff like I had told you before we started was that I'm not well read, but I'm a good listener. So I'm excited to kind of get into this. We'll start off here with the first question here after the background. So it's kind of a 3-part question, but just to try to keep some parameters in a little bit, just to kind of stay where we're trying to go here, where I'm trying to take ourselves here a little bit. But why do you think God is an anarchist? What is a Hoppian community covenant? And when do these two ideas fuse into existence?
Well, the reason I say God is an anarchist is because the dude is like, to the right of Rothbard in terms of how radical he is about free will. I mean, let's assume the existence of God for the sake of the question. The God of the Bible, he only really interfered in human action, in human interactions, on maybe once every few hundred years, and direct interference, like causing plagues and stuff like that, and
just little things like that.
Yeah, well, I mean that for then it was because he wanted to end slavery for his people, and it's not like and if the Jews had never moved to Israel because they had stayed slaves for that long, the rest of human history wouldn't have happened. So it was a really critical point in history where it really needs to go the right way. I mean, now I'm probably not going to leave it up to chance. And but on the for the entire Bible, like his greatest interactions in human affairs was sending his son to be incarnate for 33 years, and everything else is human history. And like the dude is extremely radical when it comes to just let people choose, however bad their decisions are. I'm going to give them the freedom to choose. I'm not going to be sitting there overriding people's decisions. Even when I'm like sending plagues, I'm still letting them choose, kind of. He's not like, I'm not physically there overriding their decisions with my power. I'm I'm being coercive, but I'm not overriding free will. So, and you see that really a lot in his in the law. He wrote the Law of Moses, and where he's really, really, really going out of his way to to make it a free society. And it's like that really value. I mean, it's the only truly property rights based anarchy that ever existed. All of the other anarchies, they had kind of more like voluntary government sort of thing, and they were a little bit more successful. But and it's that's how you depends on how you measure successful. They were also barbaric and horrible. But the the anarcho covenant, because it was like 3,500 years ago, this was a really barbaric time in human history. That was like, God, I would not want to live back then. But but even then, he had really tried to make it a real anarcho covenant. No government. There's no. That's I love it when atheists try to tell me that it's a theocracy in the Bible, because it's clearly not. There's no state at all. How can it be a theocracy if there's no state? So so in his law, like gambling was legalized, completely legal, and prostitution was completely legal, and drug use was completely legal, and like all the real like degeneracy sins that God is kind of known for today, which is like kind of it's kind of a lie, but all this alcohol was completely legal, and not even regulated for the most, and and he just like let everything go in the law. He's like, hey, these things are wrong and you shouldn't do them. They're bad for you, but I'm not going to sit here enforcing you. I'm not going to make a law that says you can't, because that's counterproductive. And and also, I don't want to give you a state. I really want you to say, here's why this whole voluntary property rights society that you guys want is not going to work at all, and it's going to get screwed up royally, because you guys just don't have the ability. Most people don't want freedom. They kind of want a leader. They want to trade their their liberty for statecraft, as I like to say. And that God really, he made this law of Moses to kind of, it says that later in the New Testament, hey, God did the old law to kind of prove the point that this doesn't work. You can't legislate. By legislate, I mean make laws. You can't use law to make a good and moral society. You have to do that through love. And that's the whole reason he gives us free will, is that love has to be freely chosen. You can't force it. Otherwise that's rape and it's abominable. And but he wants us to love him back. And that's, we can't do that unless we're completely free. And if he starts coming in and overriding our free will, we're going to hate him. Because we hate people that really take our freedom away when we're not voluntarily giving it to them. We hate people that take our choice away. And so that's why he doesn't do that. He's basically an anarch. He's a monarch, but he's really he's also an anarch. He's a voluntary monarch. Which was basically an anarchist.
Yeah,
he's a voluntary guy.
Yeah, that's perfect, because that leads into my next question, because I like to, in my mind, as we're going to get into this, have a timeline, and since I've been hearing you talk, you say that Christianity and monarchy created civilization, and you start yes, the timeline that you usually give, and I'd like for you to do the same, is like, after the Ice Age, and then you kind of go, and then you start kind of putting in these markers in there. Can you kind of give that to the audience, please?
Well, yeah. I mean, so let's go a little secular here. That yes, the Bible says that the Earth is 6,000 years old, but I'm not a young Earther, and I believe the Earth is quite a lot older. And so we can start, for a secular point of view, we can start 12,900 years ago at the end of the last ice age, where the planet warms up about 20 degrees, and that makes agriculture possible for the first time in, roughly 108,000 years. And so we'd basically gone the prior 100,000 years without agriculture, because that's just not possible when it's 20 degrees colder. You can't grow food like that. It just doesn't work. And so basically, if you can't grow food, you can't have large populations. because you're basically limited to hunt, two kinds of division of labor, like hunting and gathering, and also war, taking the other guy's stuff. So it's basically three, and that's it. That's all you can do. There's no capitalism. There's no computer programmers. There's no farmer. There's none of that, and because you can't grow food. Anyway, so 12,900 years ago, the planet warms up, and the ice age ends. For probably another maybe 1,000 years. Hopefully, it'll last. These interglacials don't really last very long. They're like 10 to 15,000 years at a time. So we're kind of at 12,900 years in. We're kind of due for another major ice age collapse. So whoops. Anyway, agriculture begins. We can finally start having large populations, and the first thing we do is create states. That kind of sucks. And so for the next 10,500 years after that, we got basically nowhere as a human species. We had kind of had some minor improvements, like we had learned to use metallurgy around 5,000 years ago ish. Actually, probably closer to 4,000. That was when we started working with bronze, and closer to about 3,000 years ago, we started working a little bit with iron in Europe. Because bronze, tin is not really. That was mainly in Greece where we did that because they didn't really have tin, so they actually started working with iron first. So good for them. And we started working with iron. We basically, stopped working with stone. We still kept working with stone, but that was a little more optional. We had metal too. It was just extremely expensive because it's just difficult to mine, difficult to do. Anyway, and we had basically gotten to the point after 10,500 years that, which is like the end of Rome, like 500 AD. We'd basically gotten to the point where we're, brushing our teeth with ammonia, and that's ammonia derived from urine. So because ammonia is a bleaching agent, we were literally brushing our teeth with urine, and not just anyone's urine. You wanted the rich person's urine because that was way more expensive back then.
The good stuff.
And, you actually had an Emperor Vespasian who, he started what was called a urine tax, where you actually paid your taxes in urine. And it's like, God, if only we could do that today. Hey, I got your taxes for you right here. And unfortunately, we can't do that today. But that's why sometimes we call toilets Vespasians, because that after the Emperor Vespasian, who had a urine tax that and by the way, a rich person could pay more of his taxes in urine than a poor person, because his urine was way more expensive and better. And you really want to brush your teeth with a rich man's piss. But that was where we got to in about 10,500 years. And so we got kind of lucky, because at about, it was like 538, or was it? 538, I believe. We had a major volcanic eruption. I think there was also a meteoric impact. At least that was what Randall Carlson claimed. I'm not sure about that though. But that anyway, it kicked a lot of dust up into the atmosphere, and because of that, we got like basically a volcanic winter that for like 6 harvests in a row failed, and you had major famine, and just. That was what that was like the final nail in the coffin that broke the Roman Empire apart into a bunch of Northern European monarchies. And that and when you're going from republics are called a higher time preference for power state, because they want to consume a whole lot more of the wealth of society on state activities, or statecraft as I call it. And monarchy, whereas it's a much lower form of, because it's a much lower form of state government, because the monarch, the king or queen, physically owns or privately owns the means of statecraft. They own the territory, they own the land, and they would they want to hand this thing down to their sons and daughters and their descendants, so they have an incentive kind of not to screw the pooch. It's like the family business. You want to hand the family business down to your kids. You don't want to.
Hey Andrew, can I interrupt real quick? So when you said that after Rome, basically like in Europe, they became monarchs, that was because, I mean, there's history that says that, hey, there was these generals and they had these armies and they said, hey, we can hold these
Yeah.
territories, and then the lineages start from there. And I mean, that's kind of the way it worked out.
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. You did have some kings who were elected by the local oligarchs, and you did have some election of kings, but that was a little more rare. But you did have it kind of both ways, where you basically had whoever the local warlord was, or the local general who had been stationed there. This is kind of like what happened in Great Britain, where you had the legends of King Arthur. He's basically a Roman legionnaire or something like that, or at least that's around the time. So, or perhaps his father Uther was. But that was the first one to the kings who kind of came before them were all basically Romans or warlords, and eventually they all consolidated into power through war or marriage or whatever. And then you got for like the next 1500 years you got basically monarchy. I'm not but really like 1400 years, because we kind of axed all the monarchs in the 20th century. So
but these monarchs would have seen the republic that they had just come from and see it. They would have seen it been like destroyed over time. So they came to this naturally. Like they said, or is it just that it's always better to be a king, and it just comes naturally to be like, hey, let's.
My boss isn't really returning my phone calls anymore, and because he's got his own problems. And you know what? I'm just going to keep my military here, because basically, when you the way Roman military worked is that the soldiers swore allegiance to the person, not to the Senate, and so basically that you would swear your allegiance to your general, and not to the republic. So
oh really? I never heard of that. That's the way it was. So is that why too? Like I don't know. I'm not like a real big history buff, but when I've seen some of these Roman documentaries and stuff like that, like that's why these when they would try to do civil wars or try to go back to take Rome or whatever. Yeah, all those soldiers, as long as you had money to pay them, right, or whatever. I mean, they rode with you, right? They're ride or die with you.
Yeah, pretty much. And they basically they swore their allegiance to you. So it's like I don't give a fuck what the Senate says. They can pass all the laws they want. I'm the one with the sword and spear and all that. So that sounds like that. Yeah, if they want to enforce the law, it sounds like the Senate's problem. Mm-hmm. And so basically, Rome had gotten sacked, and it was basically the barbarians had already set fire to Rome at this point, and the that the Roman Empire just had no power to really exert its will even beyond its capital city. So it's like, why am I going to listen to this guy? They can't even defend their own capital. Why am I going to take orders from them? I'm just going to set up a shop here and have a nice life. Bye. And but now that they have their own monarchy, that's their own privately owned government, they have an incentive to really want to hand it down. And they also want, and a state always wants a religion that works well with its values. So the Roman pantheon of gods doesn't work well for that. That was a high time preference religion. All polytheism is higher time preference by nature. Monotheism is where you get the real low time preference religions. And that's, monotheism is Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Islam to a slightly lesser extent, but it is still a low time preference religion, lower compared to what you had before. And so the monarchs decided.
Let me interrupt you real quick. So when people hear low means long time, like a lot more time. It's you spread it out. You span for the future, right?
Yeah, high preference. I don't really care if I have it right now. So I can wait for the future.
And anytime you say high preference right now. Okay. Yeah. Okay, cool. So then, keep going, man. I just want to throw these little in there real quick for anybody that just might hear that and be like, they don't know, sometimes they don't know.
Yeah.
Okay,
and
go ahead.
Christianity had already kind of been adopted as the official religion of the Roman Empire around 300 or early 300s by Emperor Constantine IV. And so it was kind of already there. And so they're like, yeah, we're really adopting this thing full blown now. And because they really went hardcore on this whole Christian monarchy thing, because having a low time preference government works well if you have a low time preference religion too, that tells the people, store up your treasures in heaven, and don't be a hedonist, don't spend it on, worldly pleasures, because that, separates you from God, et cetera, et cetera. And in practice, what store up your treasures in heaven means is you're either going to, donate your life savings at the end of your life to society or to your children. And you get an excess of wealth creation that way. And so that, and because you had a low time preference religion because we had like a low time preference forms of government, like monarchies that had high time preference religions, and they just like that never worked. So you really need both.
What are the tensions at play when they're not in sync? Like either way.
Basically, when they're not in sync, one of them's going to win, and it's not. Usually it's the state, not always, but it's because you do get king. If you have a high time preference religion, it will degenerate your. And if you have a low time preference state and a high time preference religion, sometimes it can, if the religion is stronger, it will degenerate the state into a republic if you're starting with a monarchy. And you saw this in like Greece and where they had it degenerate. It had a kings for a long time that eventually degenerated into like direct democracy. That was how we got democracy. They had a pantheon of all the gods who were all like not quite equal to each other, but Zeus is the leader, and you can choose if you want to worship that one or that one or that one. And and so that's a democratic religion, because you get that kind of choice. Whereas there's one God, that's the one choice, and that's kind of how that goes. And so anyway, we had, so for starting in around like 500, we really had low time preference government for low time preference government with low time preference religion for the next like 1400-ish years, and that was what gave us the all of the excess wealth that we had. There was all of the progress of human history was in like the last 1400, 1500 years. And, because again, we had for 10,500, we'd gotten basically nowhere, because at all times we either had a low time preference, a high time preference government, or a high time preference state, or both. And that's why we got nowhere. We were literally brushing our teeth with rich people's urine. And and so 1500 years later, we're talking on Zoom.
Yeah. So then
that's progress.
Yeah. So then, are you, which we'll get into, and this is just me freestyling here then. So then you're trying to make a point that when you have low time preference government and religion in sync, it creates prosperity.
Yeah, it does. You get a lot of excess wealth creation, and then the rest is just compounding interest. Because if you're growing your economy at like 1% to 2% or 3% a year, then that's all that 3%, all those 3%, all that they all compound, and eventually you get to the point where we have enough wealth in our societies to start creating technologies like this, because there's excess wealth for that. And in the Middle Ages, you saw the creations of like science, you saw the creation of the university system, you saw the erection of these beautiful cathedrals, and you saw the all kinds of literature get developed, all kinds of extra books start getting written. You get the printing press gets developed, and you get deep sea water navigation, which enables free trade for further wealth creation. And because back before we had deep sea water navigation, ships had to hug the coastline whenever they were sailing, because if you're moving goods and services from point A to point B, it's kind of a bitch. It's really expensive, but if you can float it, it's like 1/12 the cost. So it's a lot less expensive to move goods from point A to point B if you're floating it on the sea or on a river. And so before if you wanted to cross the Mediterranean, you couldn't really do that. You had to sail all the way around the coastline to do it. And you couldn't cross the Atlantic Ocean, forget it. And your ships just weren't good enough, and you didn't have the navigation skills. And eventually we invented deep sea water navigation, to where our ships could go across the real high seas and didn't have to hug the coastlines anymore. And what used to happen is you would get pirates, because you have to go along the coastline. They know the trade route, and pirates can just ambush you there, and they would steal your stuff and sink your ship. And that really hurt commerce. And this is something the Ottomans were really, really known for like 1,000 years, was that would always, rob other people's ships. And this is one of the things that eventually led to World War I, amongst other things. But, deep sea water navigation kind of fixed that, to where, I can just, I don't need the, quite the same trade route. And, it enables you to do a whole lot of different things. Now, we still have trade routes today, but those are more based on, this is the quickest point from point A to point B, rather than, rather than I have to hug the coastline. So.
Yeah. So there was an advancement that also allowed for exploration, and then the spreading of this idea of Christianity and stuff to, I guess, the New World and all that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's all that wealth creation eventually compounds enough to the point where you have enough excess wealth where you can start making these extra technological investments that make people's lives better.
Yeah. And then we get to the point where this isn't the case anymore, right? This is more of our recent couple hundred years or something history. Can you get into that? Because that's what most people are gonna at least know some, mostly of, because they see it on the History Channel.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, so around we call it the Enlightenment. I don't think we should, but we do. Around the Enlightenment, kind of 1600 to around we start having this idea of liberalism, which is where we get the idea of democracy and republics from. And 1776 starts at America is kind of first on the scene. We had republics for a while, but they never succeeded. We'd had them all throughout the monarchy age, but they never lasted. They weren't good. And the founding fathers were like, all right, we just got rid of a really, really bad king, and who frankly, compared to today, he was pretty good. It's like, we rebelled over a 3% tax, and I'm staring at my tax bill today. I'm like, if only I was paying 3%. But I had my property tax
meeting to fight all that shit off, and that sucks. But yes, the king doesn't sound too bad right now, right?
Yeah, King George doesn't sound that bad. But so we got this. We had a real, from their point of view, it was a really bad king who was kind of an idiot. But really, what it was is you can't project power. You're an island in the North Atlantic, and you want to project power onto an entire continent that's an ocean away. It's like this guy, he just couldn't do it. And it was too expensive. His military and Navy were engaged in other wars at the time that kind of occupied his attention. So we kind of saw an opportunity, and the founding fathers kind of saw an opportunity and took it. And they're like, this guy can't really fight us in a war. He can, but it's not nearly at his full strength, because if it was his full strength, we would have lost. But we saw his forces are divided. Let's try to seize power while we can. So that was what really happened, and we got in our heads that okay, we're going to try this whole republic thing again, because it's not like that's failed many times before already. So we went ahead and tried that with the Articles of Confederation, and 9 years in, we did what usually happens with republics, and you get a civil war. We had Shays' Rebellion, and the monarchy. Back then we had two kind of major ideologies that were, you had classical liberalism, or libertarianism as we call it today. That was one major ideology back then, and the other major ideology was monarchism. We should have a monarch, and the monarchists were kind of like, we told you so. And because when you get republics, what happens is as you radically start consuming more and more of the wealth of society, you get scarcity mindset where people are like, no, it's mine, no, mine, no, mine, no, mine, and they start using the republic mechanism to start voting themselves more money, and that just makes the problem so much worse.
Can you kind of define? So a lot of people, that aren't into this, but might be just checking, like I said, primos, deals and all that, just checking this out. They're, they've heard, we're, a republic, right? But it's mostly always described right now as we have a democracy. I mean, that's just put in our head. But at the time of, like you said, republics had, this idea of where liberalism started, and the idea of democracy and republics and all that. Can you kind of distinguish and kind of give what a republic is? Because you just kind of described that they eventually start using up too much of the resources, and you get to vote for that. So can you kind of give what is a republic? Because I've always, that
Yeah.
one story of when Ben Franklin, I guess, right, says like, hey, what kind of government they give you, and then he says a republic if you can keep it, meaning like
Yeah.
it probably has a lot of value and for freedom, but it also takes a lot of vigilance, and you really got to be on top of your shit to like keep that side of freedom. If not, it can, go into where
spiral out of control really quickly.
out of control. So yeah, can you kind of give what's a
Yeah,
republic?
well, what happens because it's not one guy, and what a republic is you're voting for a representative who's going to vote for your beliefs. Like you're voting for the guy who does the vote, whose vote actually matters on the policy. Whereas in like Athens, you had more of a direct democracy where it's like everyone can just vote straight on the policy. Everyone is his own representative. And the problem, as Socrates found out the hard way, is that people really suck at this whole voting thing, and they don't know what's what, and they're really easily fooled. And it's not because they're stupid. It's just like imagine everyone had to do their own plumbing. How's that going to look? How's that going to work out? It's going to be a shit. It's going to be a shit show. Imagine if you had to really grow all of your own food. How's this going to work out? Like, this is not going to work out well. Most people are not going to do a good job of it. And voting is kind of the same way, where only a few people really know what they're doing, and and the rest are kind of like, fuck if I know. And it's not their fault. It's just they're not specialized for it. Yeah, and it really takes a lot of like you said, vigilance and hard work to know your stuff. And if you're not really paying attention and really studying and making yourself better, you're not going to do a good job. And that's just true of anything in life. It's no one's fault.
So Franklin knew what's up, right? I mean, he's straight up said it, right? They knew, right?
Yeah, and every Republican democracy, they're known this is the reason why the monarchists thought this is such a barbaric form of government, is that they were so violent. All of the republics in human history were so incredibly violent. And it's like Rome by itself had like 20 in their first. Remember, our republic is like 230 years old. In Rome's first 230 years, they had like 26 civil wars, 26 of them. We got away with like one civil war, and that doesn't count all the external wars that Rome had, because they were known to be conquerors. I mean, they were, like Greece and Athens because their democracy didn't last long at all, because it was such a shit show. And for their first like 100 years, they were at war for like 77 of them. And they were a city state. You're a city and you're at war. For like 77 of 100 years. And again, the reason for this is that people will start trying to use that republic, that voting mechanism, to vote themselves money and vote themselves legal favors and screw each other over. And they'll be like, hey, that's not fair, I'm going to attack you. And this is why it always descends into civil war and other war, because again, once you start really consuming all the wealth of society during this corruption mechanism, what you'll find out is, okay, people start getting really poor, and so they get desperate, and they want to compensate for that. So what will happen is the government will say, well, how about we go to war with our neighbors, because somehow this is all their fault and the people are stupid, so they believe it. And we go to war, we take all their stuff and conquest, and we steal it from them. And you saw this all throughout Rome. Like, all of Rome's wealth was stolen from other people that they conquered and just looted. And that was how Rome got to be such a high civilization, was theft, and barbarism. And the founding fathers knew this. And they saw it because you saw this all throughout human history over and over and over again. And the monarchist wing of the founding fathers were like, oh my God, this is such a barbaric institution. This is not going to work out. And sure enough, 9 years in, you had like the state of Massachusetts decided that it was going to really screw over its people in just a absolutely horrible way. Like they had like Civil War debts that they had to pay, or not Civil War, Revolutionary War debts that they had to pay. And so, what they did in corruption was that they're like, they made it look like they were going to default on all of their debts and just not pay them. And so basically they had paid all of their soldiers in bonds, and, saying gave them all IOUs, and they made it look like, we're not going to pay it. So basically you can't buy a meal with an IOU. So the soldiers sold all of their bonds, all of their war bonds on the on the cheap for like 10 cents on the dollar. And then what happened was they sold them to a whole bunch of speculators who then turned around and lobbied the government with their money to, like, the Wall Street guys. These were the Wall Street guys of the day. They bought all the war bonds and then turned around and lobbied the government of Massachusetts to raise a really high tax on the people to make sure that they paid all the debts. And so basically, not only did these soldiers that had just fought and died in the Revolutionary War and their widows, they had just they basically gotten scammed, where like they didn't get paid, and then what the IOU they got paid with, they were kind of manipulated into thinking it was going to be worthless. And then to add further insult to injury, you had like the government decided, hey, we're really going to tax a lot of the poor people and the middle class to pay the rich fuckers, who had kind of manipulated the system. And this is something you always saw in democracy. It always happens. And and so you had Daniel Shea, who's like, okay, I'm fucking sick and tired. We just overthrew one government. Let's get this. We're gonna have to overthrow another one. And so you had our first civil war with Shea's rebellion, where and Daniel Shea, he was successful at first, and he actually was able to take over Massachusetts. And eventually, George Washington had to raise an army, and was really difficult to go and kill him and put down the rebellion. But this was and then the monarchists kind of came back like a year 2 years later, and were like, we told you so. That if you just have an unrestricted democracy, if you have an unrestricted republic, this is what's going to happen. You're going to get wars because people are too evil. And they're too evil, they're too corrupt, they're too foolish, and they're too ignorant, too uneducated, and there's really not much you can do to change that. And so they basically said, okay, so we're going to have this new thing. It's called a constitution, and we're going to make it 2/3 monarchy, because the Supreme Court and the presidency are basically both monarchical positions, even though the Supreme Court really is a monarchy, and the presidency is kind of less so, because you still have to elect the guy, but he has a shit ton of power. He's one guy.
Yeah, the office is monarch,
yeah.
But the Supreme Court, because they get to it's for life or whatever, right? So they're in there forever.
Life, and there's only 9 of them. It's not really these are two basic, and you have to at every single level of government, you have to have the same kind of system, where you have a legislature, an executive, and a Supreme Court. Because of that structure, which is it works very similarly in all 50 states. What you basically have is a government that's at least 2/3 monarchy, and so our republic is really not much of a republic. It's very different, because you have all of these restrictions that are enforced basically through monarchy, and
so then back to a little bit of just such the Constitution. 2/3 of it had these low time preference inserted into it. Inserted into it. So it had more of what you're advocating for.
Yeah, exactly. And if you really want to get specific, well, because in the Senate, the reason I say it's a little more than 2/3 is because the Senate, they're there for 6 years. They have very long terms, and the reason that's why they're so much more moderate, whereas the House is very, very radical. And these were also appointed positions. So it's initially they were appointed. You didn't directly elect your senator. They were appointed by the governor or by the state legislature, and they were accountable to the state legislature. So, and they had really, really long terms. So even like the legislatures that we have, the legislature of the federal government is basically half monarchy almost. I mean, it is a much larger body, though. But these were not half of it was not democratically elected, and they had 6 year and they had like 6-year terms. And this is what makes the Senate the better of the two bodies. Usually, is that they have much longer time preference horizons. So that the problem with having election every 2 years is that the politicians basically they make all these promises and they don't have the time to fulfill them with. So they tell all of these, and it ends up being all lies. So and the reason is they just don't have the time to do it. It's only 2 years, and whereas the Senate, they're better able to keep a whole lot of their promises, because they can think on a longer time horizon, and they can actually make more realistic promises. They don't have to be such fire-breathing radicals, and it shows. So that's the problem with having really elections every 2 years, is that It's the people can't, no one can physically keep all of their promises. You just can't do it. There's not enough time. And
so then why did you're getting to that, why did our constitution so far only give us one civil war when other republics already had more? It was for these reasons, but what else was unique about it?
Yeah, basically because you had at least 2/3 of it was monarchy. It made, you never have civil war with monarchy, or like you had revolutions, but they were rare, like really, really rare, because what would happen is the king, but it's hard for, an elite outside of the monarchy to, have gather enough forces to have a rebellion. And like you would have like maybe one of his dukes or his warlords, was one of the people who elected him. Maybe he was feeling kind of aggrieved because he wanted to be the king who got elected, and and he was feeling pissy, so he helped engineer a revolution or a civil war. But those are really, really rare. And because if a civil war is like one guy, and when something goes wrong, everyone knows whose fault it is, but it was really difficult to have a civil war under monarchy. But because you had our constitution is basically 2/3 monarchy, it makes it a whole lot more difficult for Congress to do like the sort of Daniel Shea thing that happened to him. And what you ended up having, the reason we got reason we did was that you eventually did get exactly that sort of situation where the North was, basically taxing all of the taxes for the federal government, or at least like a vast majority of them were paid by the South. And all of the money that was spent by the federal government, like 80-something% of it, was being like spent on the North to build up the North's economy and, on Northern cronyism. And this is why we got like all the Northern railroads and stuff. This is why they had a much bigger manufacturing economy, was they fucking stole the money for it. And I mean, granted, I could say the Southerners probably deserved it because, they were slave owners, but, so was the North. The North had slavery too. And it's just, it was kind of a crap show all around, where you had, two groups of really horrible people. I mean, these two groups of like slave owners and kleptocrats and, warmongers. And, it's like, but you had bad people really on both sides of it. You didn't have good people on both sides of the issue. You had bad people on both sides of this issue. There weren't good people involved. And, like Lincoln kind of redeemed himself by ending slavery, but that's about the only good thing he did. Everything else is like, this guy put journalists in jail. He shot people who refused to, he tried to conscript a lot of immigrants and non-citizens to fight in his war. Like there were a whole lot of Irish and German immigrants back then. And, and he conscripted them and their sons to come fight in my war, come fight in his war. And, when they refused, he shot their families. Like he shot them he shot protesters. And it's like, this guy was really bad, except for the fact that he ended slaves. Like that was the only good thing he did. And, it was really, really, really good thing that he did. But, I mean, that's the only thing that redeems him. If he's not in hell, it's because, he ended slavery.
Yeah, no,
he's that bad of a guy.
Yeah, no, I hear you. So coming out of that, we go, I guess the Civil War was ours, but then we get into like the world stage after that, more. And I guess we get into the world wars. Can you kind of get into that here? And as we get at our timeline almost complete here?
So for another, 80-ish years, we didn't have any more. We didn't have another civil war. It was mainly because the South was just so broken after they couldn't possibly fight back. And I mean, everything had been destroyed. Like they would just Lincoln's armies would come in and they just burn all the crop fields. Forget trying to loot them, which they did. They looted hundreds of what today would be like hundreds of millions of dollars worth of the loot. They just straight up took from the South during the war, and everything else they just straight up burned it. And so the South was just so broken that they couldn't possibly fight back. And during the Reconstruction, they were too weak to have another one. So we didn't. And so for another 80 years, we were rebuilding and building our wealth back up and continuing to expand westward. And then we found gold, and that kind of and that helped a lot. And but eventually you got to the and also, having slavery ended, that did give us a lot of economic boost, because slavery is kind of a shit economic system that drives down wages unnecessarily and makes people way less productive. So having that gone really did help our economy as well. But we finally got to the point in the early 1910s where we were like wealthy enough to start having the conversation about having bigger and bigger government, and this was where we got the progressive era that wanted to redistribute all of the wealth that we had, because you had Karl Marx in the 1880s who had come up with his theory of socialism, which was debunked basically immediately, within 5 years, and the but I mean this has spread all throughout Germany and Europe. And what happened in Europe is, basically you had a whole bunch of people who were like, hey, we want to try this socialism, where you're not going to have any classes anymore. You're not going to have any poverty. It's all going to be utopia, et cetera, et cetera. And, they thought that, republics were the best way forward for that. So you had a whole bunch of, communist and socialist revolutions that really tried to, republics that basically they tried to take power. And eventually they overthrew a whole lot of their monarchies. And, this is like kind of what happened with the French Revolution. Same thing with the, British, where they had basically had been sidelining their monarchs for, hundreds of years at this point, because they had basically threatened them into, hey, we're going to have a partial republic now. They kind of want to do a little bit of the same thing we did, but what ended up happening is, all throughout, what ended up happening is, these new parliamentary republics, or these, monarchy republics, these hybrids started to be like, all right, it's time to start, we have a monarchy, we have a democracy now, and it's time to go to war. This is what republics do. They go to war. And they went to war with all of the, German monarchies, and German, Turks, and I forget who the other Axis power was of World War I. But the republics went to war with the monarchies, and then you had Woodrow Wilson, who's like, "Hey, Europe's having a war, we want in too." And this was like the greatest political mistake in American history, was getting into World War I. Kind of make the world safe for democracy, which is kind of ironic because democracy is like a barbaric form of government. That causes so much violence.
So just to interrupt a little bit, just for anyone that's listening, like you are making like it, it's going to blow some people's minds that they're going to, you're saying, hey, democracy means death, basically, right?
Basically.
And when people, they're going to be like, wait, hold on, our whole lives, it is for democracy and this and that. And you're just straight up hey, when someone comes waving a flag that they want to bring democracy, it means a lot of blood is going to be shed, right?
Usually, historically, that's pretty much always how it happens. And we get to World War I, where now we have, democracy really spreading across Europe, because all the monarchs got defeated, and their kingdoms were broken apart into and transformed into democracies. And because again, and these were not the restricted forms of democracy either. These were the unrestricted forms, which were far more violent, and then their, more limited counterparts. Like, remember, again, we live in a limited republic that is like basically over 2/3 monarchy. And, and the ones that emerged after World War I, like the Weimar Republic, and, this is what ended up giving us Hitler, because Hitler got like he got like 30% of the vote, and it's like, and by the way, democracy voting for murderers is like, this is pretty normal. Again, like you can even go back into the Bible where, it's like the end of Jesus's trial. And Pilate's like, who do you want me to let go? This mass murderer Barabbas or the Son of God? And they're like, give us the murderer. It's like they still, you could have literally a perfect candidate in an election, and they'll still go with the murderer. It's like democracy killed the Son of God. Democracy killed the Savior. Like they still, you could literally, again, I can't get over this. You had literally a perfect candidate, and you still voted for the murderer.
I like that, man. Democracy killed the Savior.
I know. It's like good. People like to say the Jews killed the Savior. Like, nah, it wasn't really the Jews. It was democracy. It's like people suck at this whole voting thing, and it never works out. And so anyway, it's like, democracy voting for murderers is pretty typical. It's like people just suck at this thing. They're not good at it. And Eventually you get them voting for Hitler. And he got like 30% of the vote, and a parliamentary system, that's a landslide. And so you got that from the Weimar Republic, and what it was basically democracy also gave us Hitler. And he was just a violent demagogue who wanted to kill a lot of people and loot their stuff. He wanted to loot, he basically wanted to loot the Jews because they were the only ones doing even decently well. It's like you don't loot the poor person; he doesn't have any money. No, you're going to loot the rich people. And so this is where you got that from. And eventually, if the democracy can do wars, it can do them bigger and better and twice. And so you got a Second World War, and you had all of Europe basically destroyed. And so at the end of World War II, America and the Soviet Union were the only ones with like militaries left standing. Everyone else has just gotten destroyed, and all the navies of the world had sunk except for the U.S. military. Even the Soviet Navy had basically been sunk, and so eventually it just got to they didn't really have a navy because it's a geography problem, but they had some ships, but they just were not really helpful. But basically, you got to the point, where you have the U.S. and the Soviet Union. We're the only ones left, and we're looking across at how Stalin's army had just gotten through like raping and pillaging their way across northern Germany, and basically, we're like, oh hell no, we're not going to do this, because we were looking at World War III right there, whereas the U.S. versus the Soviet Union, and we're just like, no, we can't, no. So what we did was we got all of the combatants from from basically our side of the war together, and we put them in a room in a golf resort called Bretton Woods, and we put them in a room and we said, hey, we're putting a gun to your head. I know you just got I know all of you just got through shooting at each other, but we're all going to be on the same team now, and because we have a gun to your head called a nuclear weapon, and if you don't obey us, there's going to be problems. And even then so here's what you're going to do. You're going to stand in between us and the Soviets. How's that sound? They're like, no, I don't care. And we don't care if you have nukes. It's not working out. We're not going to be your human meat shields. And in between you and and Stalin's Red Army that just got done raping and pillaging its way across Germany. So we're like, well, what if we put some money in your pocket too? And they're like, well, okay, now you're talking. And so we gave them the Marshall Plan, which was a gigantic bribe to say, hey, you're all on our team now. And in addition to this gun, we're going to put some money in your pocket, and you're all on our team. Does that sound great? And like, nah, you're going to sweeten the deal still, because Stalin looks really scary. And so eventually we say, okay, well, our Navy is the only one left, and we're going to try this whole new thing called free trade, where you're allowed to send your trade ships to other people's countries, to buy commodities, buy raw commodities, ship them home, metabolize them into finished goods, and re-export those goods on the market for hard currency. Because this was something you weren't allowed to do earlier, because we had the age of empires where countries were crossing their trade routes, and we're like, no, this is my trade route, this is my destination. You're not allowed to do this, and you're not allowed to come here, because if you do, I'm going to shoot you. And this was one of the things that led to World War I, was that you didn't have free trade. And this is something we've kind of noticed since then, is that countries that trade with each other tend not to want to shoot at each other, and countries that don't trade with each other often want to shoot at each other. Just happens that way. Anyway, so you eventually you get this free trade thing where it's like, all right, we're going to pay you in bribes, and we're going to pay for everyone's security. We're going to be the security people. We're going to be the policemen for the world, to say that no one else is allowed to have empires anymore. We basically the U.S. basically behaved as if we lost the war. We paid what today is trillions of dollars in bribes, and we've paid like $1 trillion in our military budget basically every year since, if you account for inflation. And basically we've been paying them because we won the war, and this is how we got world peace. And by the way, peace. Because we still have the job of being policemen for the world, for the whole fucking planet. And we had to go to war with like Vietnam, and go to war with Korea, go to war with like in the Middle East, because anywhere that trade happens, we have to be there to say, no, we're not doing this. You guys are not allowed to go to war. We're the police. We're the only ones who are allowed to go to war, because the laws don't apply to the police. Duh. And and because basically, we had to do like Vietnam, even though Vietnam and Korea were like nothing. We still had to go to war there because it's the credibility of the alliance. We said that we were going to we would go to war on everyone else's behalf, and and if we don't do that, if we don't show them that we're not willing to pay in blood and soldiers and sweat and tears and all that, then if we're not willing to do it when it doesn't count, why would we do it when it does count? And it's like this is something that builds up. Those are wars to build up our credibility. We didn't have to fight them, but it was because we wanted the credibility to the alliance that we had built, and so we still had to go to war with everybody. But but otherwise, people mostly had peace, and because it was since the since like the 90s, when the Soviet Union fell, like 92, the year I was born, like that was that we haven't had a reason to have this alliance anymore. So when Trump comes along in 2016, it's like this like order that we have, this free trade and all that, this doesn't really work for us. And he's right, because it wasn't designed to. It was designed as a security bribe. It was not designed to. It was designed to be America paying the rest of the world for peace and order. And it wasn't designed for. It was designed for America's security, not our economic benefit. So he was right.
Yeah.
And so now that he's kind of ended that free trade order, oh well, the cycle of history starts again.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Thanks for checking out the show. Be sure to support our efforts here by checking out palomaverdecbd.com. It is a online store that my wife and I run, and you get 25% off by using the promo code Chingazos. And just in case you guys don't know, it's not in my nature to be interviewing people like this, but if you like what I'm putting out, just know that I'm on some CBD. I take a gummy about an hour before I know I'm going to do the show, and about 20 minutes before the show, I'll take some drops, just takes the edge off, and then I just get into it. So if that's something that sounds like, oh, in your life, you do some other stuff that might benefit you to take the edge off before you get into some shit, try some CBD products. So go to palomaverdecbd.com, use the promo code Chingazos, get 25% off anything in the store. Peace. Yeah, so I've also perfect, man. So I mean the timeline is perfect, and everybody that hears you in the future or hears some of your past. I mean, you laid out kind of like your timeline of a lot of how these things played out, which is perfect because it'll lead into your theory. So I've also heard you say that like every 80 years or fourth generation starts a new war to bring in a new order, and you've called it a correction mechanism, and you hit right on the timeline here, which is Bush in 91 had said that he had called for a new world order, and that was an order after the Soviets were going to collapse. As we lead into getting into what archotropism is, does archotropism when he called for the world order, where are we at in this 80 years? Did he call it too early, too late? Are we in the middle of it, or where are we at? And then we'll get into your archotropism.
I'm praying that COVID was just the thing that that they're calling it fifth generation warfare. I'm praying that COVID was the war, the crisis.
Okay, so that's
I'm praying that that's it. We might still get a war because the free trade system just broke down, and it's and for like the last 10ish years, Japan and China have been kind of competing to see who can be more aggressive in the South China Sea, and Japan doesn't get shit for it because they're our ally, but China's been extremely aggressive because they've kind of noticed, oh, this order is basically broken down. It's not really a thing anymore. And so basically, you could see and they're trying to, fight a war. They're wanting to fight a war with Taiwan right now. And Japan has basically said, hey, if you go after Taiwan, we're going to enter this and we're going to sink all your ships because Japan's Navy is way stronger than China's Navy. And, and Taiwan itself is also no pushover. So they're right now we're shaping up for another war, major conflict in the East and South China Sea. So it's like, we're really worried about that. And it's like, I'm hoping COVID just did it in because, COVID wrecked so many of the world's economies. Again, like a poor country can't really go to war. They have an incentive to, but, they really can't really go to war very easily.
So
Because they just don't have the money to do it.
it might have been the correction mechanism.
I'm praying. I really don't want to have another war. This has been awful.
I hear you, man. Yeah, man. Thank you for breaking it all down, that whole timeline, man. I mean, that was about an hour, but it was, man, yeah. it was perfect, man. It really laid it all out. So now let's get into archotropism, man. To kind of now when you bring it up and bring up, you can kind of jump back to your timeline and how and we can jump back and forward and we can get into it pretty good. So I have the rules here in front of me. I've consumed it in the last couple of months on and off, but this last week I've really gotten into it, and I feel like I got a grasp on it. But you are the man of the hour here, so yeah, man, start getting into it, man. What is archotropism?
All right, so let me pull this up. Archotropism is the process by which a state grows and gains power through extracting order from chaos. It's also the second definition is the process of turning a society towards relying on a state-derived order, an aggressive order. The state is it's basically a mafia pretending it's a human rights organization. It is designed to provide people with aggression as a service. Again, this is what you see this very clearly in a republic, where they're like, hey, we're going to go steal money from your neighbor on your behalf, vote for me.
Yes. And, but you have 5 or 6 rules, right? You have you 6 rules. Okay. So, okay. Can we get into the first one and then we just go down the line and then we'll freestyle them all together and put some applications to them and see how it plays out?
Yeah. Okay. So again, the process of archotropism is, is basically you're deriving power by extracting order from chaos. And, and so that's what the system is. And the 6 laws are basically, here's how it works. Here's how that process really works out. And so you just want me to just read them and then,
just freestyle.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah.
All right. So first law of archotropism is the value of power. Power is relative, not absolute. Therefore, the value of power can neither be created nor destroyed. It may only be transferred from one wielder to another or transformed from one form into another. The sum total value of power is always conserved. This is the conservation of the value of power. And the second, by the way, I define power basically 2 ways. I classify it 2 ways, not really define, but classify it 2 ways. It can be either potential power or kinetic. Potential is anything that is non-coercive. So anything at all, it can be like market power. It can be influence. It can be, I just have wealth. It can be, I have brains and knowledge or, and stuff like that. Knowledge is power, wealth is power. It can be, I have an army of soldiers, that's manpower, it's anything that is not coercive, and, kinetic, and then the other is kinetic power, which is basically political power. This is, pay me your taxes. I have a gun to your head, pay me your taxes. And, or this is, I'm the government, I made a rule, you're here and you didn't obey it, so I'm going to throw your ass in a cage. And or like, and I said you're not allowed to put this substance in your body, so so I'm putting you in a cage, and that's kinetic power, that's coercive. So there are 2 kinds: potential is non-coercive, and and then kinetic is coercive.
And how is power created in this?
Power is anything that has value, really. Anytime you create wealth, like through capitalism, anytime you create knowledge through science, anytime you have an institution that people are willing to pay value to, this is anything that has real value to humans has a power component to it. And so, like you're like a dollar in your wallet, it's $1 economic value, but it also has a dollar as as political, it also has a power value too. But the difference is, whereas economics, you can create all the new wealth you want and it doesn't matter, whereas power, it's the second law, it's basically, it's about inequality, that the power seeks consolidation from lower concentration to higher concentration. Predation is defined as the act of consolidating power. So basically, this is where you get the idea that the strong prey upon the weak, because that's the high concentration of power preying upon the low concentration of power and taking its shit. And And so when you have like this sort of inequality function where you have power wants to be consolidated, this is where you're going to get aggression from. This is why the left cares about inequality so much, is that they're it's like they recognize that someone like Bezos has the ability to basically just buy the whole Congress and do whatever he wants with it, and that scares the daylights out of them. And that's why wealth inequality does matter to them, because whoever has the most really has the most ability to buy coercive power. And as we all know, our government is for sale. So the third law of archotropy, I'm going to rush through these like you wanted. The third law of archotropism is that the economic value of power is subjective. So as the economic value of power is subjective, so in other words, I might value a particular something more than you do, or you might value it different than me. It's all subject to people's preferences and opinions. And the fourth law of archotropism is the definition of power. This is power is equal to force divided by distance and time. And so basically, this is saying that you have to be physically present to force someone, to force someone to do your will and to coerce them. Like, I can't like raise a finger gun to you and over Zoom and expect you to obey me and hand over your wallet. I actually have to be physically present with a real gun, to say, Carlos, give me your money.
And this was kind of like you said about the king couldn't, in the revolution, the oceans, and they just
basically
couldn't. Go ahead.
He couldn't project his military power to the Americas because they're a whole ocean away. What are you going to do? And he has a big navy, but that navy was elsewhere, and the fighting other wars. So he couldn't muster the force and send it far enough to enough. He couldn't muster enough force and put it far enough to where he could put down the revolution and the American Revolution, and therefore he lost. He couldn't divide. He couldn't send his force over distance and time. Basically, time components that you can't be in two places at once. And this is again, some of these, they might sound very similar to thermodynamics, and whereas like this one is almost exactly the definition of power in thermodynamics, but the difference here is that distance and time are divided under archotropism, whereas distance is multiplied in thermodynamics. So slight differences. And the fifth law is that in a closed system, all power is subject to entropy, in parentheses, chaos, and tends towards decay. And that is basically that's almost verbatim from thermodynamics. This is just the idea that, hey, things change over time. They accumulate chaos, they accumulate disorder or bad orders, and because of that, they stop working. Even like the human body, it gets old and stuff doesn't work anymore, and you die. And
can you give an example of that is that kind of what we're slowly going through now? Kind of.
Yeah, this is where you get the fourth turning from, because the fourth turning is, basically all about, you may have heard from the book about the fourth turning that there are four types of turns that a society will always go through based on the human lifespan and the life expectancy. And, every generation, has a particular archetype, that they embody. And these are all due to human incentives and human economics changing as generations go on. So you get a new order with a new set of laws, and people adapt to that, and then through adapting to it, they change it. They start modifying it and trying to modify it to their own selfish ends, and they eventually do that after 4 generations. It gets to the point where this thing is basically unusable. It doesn't work for anybody anymore, and it's not valuable. So you get a generation that really hates it and wants to do away with it. So, and they do. And this is where you get a lot of wars come from. This is where you get, like the Bretton Woods order, like that Trump just, destroyed. It wasn't working for us anymore after basically 3 or 4 generations, and he got rid of it. And usually a war follows, but hopefully we got lucky.
And is this also the tension between people? I'm 37 and you said you're late 20s, but is this the tension that we feel to the boomer class to say,
yep,
hey,
exactly right.
They get mad at us for voting a certain way, however it is. And then we look back and like, wait a minute, you guys haven't done that great of it. Like, why are you guys talking shit? Look at all the debt. Look at you guys are the ones in power. Look at all that's the tension. Is that the tension you're talking about there?
Yeah, I mean, they took the greatest economy in human history with the greatest country with the most wealth of anybody, and they turned it into and they mortgaged it 10 times and turned it into this debt-ridden, shitty system that has left their children worse off than they were. And they broke the American dream. So yeah, we're pissed at them. And so I was like, the American dream isn't that you do better; it's that your children do better than you do. And they broke that. So
which is the low time preference was built into that. And now as they're getting older, they're gonna definitely keep looking out for themselves. They're the ones that vote. They're the ones that
they broke the Constitution, and this is not the first time that's happened. It's like you had the Constitution that the founders created, and then 4 generations later, Lincoln kind of wiped his butt with it, and it never was quite the same afterwards because that kind of distrust was always there, and so I mean you basically you had a constitution where we were supposed to be able to secede and leave because it was a contract, it was a compact, and we were supposed the South was supposed to be able to legally leave, but they Lincoln's like, well, we're not doing that, so you have to stay, forcefully, and he also didn't have a standing army back then, and Lincoln kind of started that, so basically he changed the Constitution right there, and he never actually amended it. He never went through the amendment process, but he still made the change, and it's still here. And then you get to the 80 years later in the New Deal, where you had one thing after another that's just completely unconstitutional. It's like the government is not allowed to do over half the things they do today are just completely unconstitutional, and they just do it anyway. And the welfare programs, entitlements, basically all the wars, and they just do it. They just don't care. The Constitution says they can't, and they just do it anyway. So we've really had 3 constitutions, because they just don't want to obey it, and they don't have to. They're the government, and so that you have these systems that are built up, and 3 or 4 generations of manipulation later, they break down and usually into war, and they just don't work anymore. They don't serve anybody's needs, and usually fighting breaks out. And you had that basically twice with Lincoln and the Civil War, and then again with FDR and the New Deal. And now we're at the third time again, where hey, you just had the entire country get put on house arrest for a year. Hundreds of millions of people put on house arrest, and it's talk about incredibly unconstitutional. They just did it anyway, and. I think it meant there was that one governor from New Jersey who was when Tucker Carlson asked him, where do you get the authority in the Bill of Rights to do this? We didn't consider it. He just straight up says, we didn't even consider it. It wasn't a consideration. We're only thinking about people's safety and my own power. And he didn't say the last part, but he basically he said the quiet part out loud that he didn't even think about the Bill of Rights. So he just did it, whatever. And so all these orders, they just stop working. And now I think you're about to have a bloodbath in the 2022 election.
How is that going to play out?
I think the Republicans are going to clean up.
Okay.
And it's not going to change much. But.
And these are election cycles, right? They're always, and that leads into your next rule, right?
Final law is that an overreach from one side demands an overreach from the other side. This is again kind of like thermodynamics, that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and this is kind of what happens is that if the left really overreaches, the right is also going to really overreach, and if the right really overreaches, like we did in the 90s, the left is really going to overreach, like they're doing today, and you see this, kind of going back all throughout, American history, where you see, the right and the left will both overreach, and and it'll cause the other side to become, reactionary, as we call them, and we're like, no, we're going to actually force our beliefs on the other side and push you all back, and it kind of happens on a 1 to 2 decade time span. So. You'll usually have 1 decade of the right, being in power and overreaching, and then 1 decade of the left being in power and overreaching. And we just got done with a, kind of a decade and a half of the left overreaching, and we're really sick and tired of all this woke bullshit.
Yeah, no, that's perfect, man. And I want to be respectful of your time, and
Thank
for
you much.
anybody that wants to get in depth into these into the laws, they can check out your page. But you have a lot of content there where you really get into deep into each one of them. But I like, I consider myself like, I'll say like a libertarian, Libertino, whatever, Latino with through liberty perspective. But, I also consider myself like a non-interventionist, the way I deal with my neighbors, the way I deal with everybody, things like that. And from listening to you and about the low time preference and all that, I'm not very religious, like at all. My wife is. And I thought it was interesting that, when I proposed to her, I proposed three things when I proposed, and the first one that I proposed without even knowing this stuff, I said, hey, I want to grow old with you. I want you to be the mother of my children, and I want you to be my partner in crime. And those three things were kind of like, hey, we're ride or die. And it's a low time preference. Like, hey, whatever happens, we're gonna grow old together. So we're gonna, and that's me. And that's me applying like the low, like what you're thinking.
Yeah.
Not that I did it purposely but so how can somebody as a individual, family, these type of structures apply your theory kind of and put it into play in their life, business, like different things like that? How can they play that out a little bit?
Well, yeah, I mean, basically everything good in society, really comes from having one person, who has all of the accountability and all of the responsibility and all the decision-making power, really making the decisions. And the, kind of like you as a, a father figure, the father really is the head of the household. He really makes the decisions, and he has the responsibility for it. And if you look in the Bible, it's like, it says wives should be, submissive to their husbands, and that husbands should, love them back, because a lot of people, they stop right there and they say, oh, that's horrible. It's misogynistic and sexist and all that. But whatever, basically what it's saying is that the woman is responsible to her man, but then it goes on to say, well, the man in turn is responsible to God. It's like, ooh, it's a much higher standard that we got, because now, it's like they only have to be accountable to us. And like, who are we? We're nothing. We're like, just a guy, or just a man. And, now I have to be responsible to Almighty God, creator of heaven and earth, and judge of all of good and evil. Like, this is the guy I have to be, responsible to. Is like, are you sure like, which part of this is sexist? It's like, if anything, it's the other direction. And, but, because of this, God has basically, it's like, you as the man, you have the power, but boy, do you have responsibility and accountability. That it's like, your wife can't really do much to you, but God sure can. And, it's like, gee, it's like, you do have the accountability, and, with great power comes great responsibility. But this is the incentive system, is that if you do a good job, things are going to work out well for you. And and you see this also in capitalism. Like, you're also a small business owner. Like, you don't have this really isn't run by democracy, and you don't have a committee that makes every single decision. And you have one guy who, takes all of the risk, and with his own money. And, you basically, like, you have to take everything. You take all the responsibility, all the accountability, all the risk. And you have all the decision-making power. If something goes wrong, it's your fault. And that's kind of like this, monarchy is a slow time preference. Is all of the benefits of capitalism and private companies and free markets. These are all benefits of basically monarchy, or at least this monarchical form of power.
Yeah, and listening to you say that, and it kind of brought me back to kind of how you were saying that God is an anarchist because he gives you free will, and how you're saying like, hey, we're responsible to God. So like I said, I'm not religious, but I'm hearing you out. So hey, it's kind of like, hey, if you don't, and as libertarians, as we get into this, and we want to change government and change that and get in through different avenues of politics and all that, it's like, hey, if your family ain't right and you ain't right, that's the most important form of government you got, because you have the free will that God gave you to get your shit in order. And if that shit in order, why are you even worried about trying to like do that
part of your life? It's like again, like you have with your children, because you love them, you want to benefit, you want to have them the best benefit you can be. So you're going to raise them, to really defer gratification and to make good, righteous decisions and live the right way that they're supposed to live, because that's what's healthy for them. And, and to do that, you might have to, I don't know, I don't know if you spank or not, but, that might be something you do. You might, but you go out of your way to really try to teach them, good values. And you don't, if you don't feed them sugar for every single meal, you feed them healthy stuff, because you don't want them to be, old and fat and unhealthy and diabetic. It's like you really, you try to balance their good across time. This is that balancing preferences across time. This is time preference, and this is low time preference, where you're really making an investment in your child. And the way that human welfare used to work was that, you were a good parent to your children, and therefore, your children in your old age, when you were no longer able to work because you're old and frail and sick, and your children would come back and take care of you. And this is something you still see in the Hispanic community a lot.
It's
Asian
like
community too. I'm married to
no,
a Chinese woman.
yeah, it's just like not even like,
don't
I
even
think
think
you're
about
frowned upon if you send your parents to
Yeah,
no, you're like, hey, nah, that ain't the way it works with
I mean,
us.
it's like you're a horrible child, an ungrateful child. Like, what did they do to you that made you hate them so much? And this was nature's welfare system, where you're balancing your good and theirs across time, and they balance theirs and yours across time. And you have time, a love relationship balances the good of each people across time. And this is the way humanity is supposed to work. And you also see the same relationship in capitalism. Remember, Christ says that love your neighbor fulfills the whole law. Love your neighbor as yourself, as yourself. That's the key. That's a really, really key component, because, it's like people don't actually love themselves all that much. So it's like, it's actually a really low bar. So it's like, when people are really honest with themselves about who they are, they're usually not impressed. And they're usually kind of like, I kind of suck. When they're being honest, usually they don't want to be honest with themselves. But but they will say, but when you actually look at what that really means, it's like, just treat yourself the way you treat yourself. And and what you see with capitalism is basically the same exact relationship, where I, as the producer, and you as the consumer, we are each balancing our own needs across time, and in this relationship, we're trading value for value voluntarily. Again, love in the Christian sense is always voluntary. This is in God's sense, it's always voluntary. So when and when you're engaging in a market transaction, this really is a form of love your neighbor. And for granted, the relationship only lasts the duration of the transaction, but this is exactly what that is the producer is trying to balance how much he's producing and how little, based on what he perceives your needs to be. And you're working and saving money according to what you think your needs are, and trying to manage your money accordingly to what you think everything else is going to cost based on what the producer's preferences are. And this is that value for value, entirely voluntary. That it's basically it's the image of Christian love. Now, granted, it's Christian love is selfless in like the fourth level. There's like 4 levels of love in Christianity. Capitalism mimics the first one, which is selfish love, because whenever you start loving someone, it's always self-centered. Like, hey, this person's hot, and and you're like, oh, you just want to be with them, and it's for you, it's for your benefit. But eventually you grow to the point where you're like, man, this person's just such a good person. I just love them so much. I die for them. And that's where love grows to in like the 4th level. And so so it starts off selfish. All love starts off as selfish, but Christian love, necessarily grows into something selfless. And or at least that's the Christian idea of love. And you've had it kind of echoed sometimes in pagans, but not really. But eventually, like, even like if you're with a business that you've just been a loyal customer to forever, and maybe they fall on hard times, and you're doing pretty well, and you're like, they've given me good service in the past, I'm going to keep going to them even if their prices are a little bit higher, because I know that they're a good business, they're a good mom and pop store, I know that they're treating their employees fairly and well, better than Walmart, so I'm going to go to the mom and pop store instead of Walmart. And this is another thing of where it's like, okay, capitalism, or free market capitalism really tries to mimic, the best kind of capitalism really tries to mimic, the Christian ideal of love. And this is why it works. It's value for value, traded voluntarily. and with preferences balanced for each other across time. That's capitalism.
Yeah, no, perfect, man.
And when you start adding force into, I'm sorry to interrupt, but when you start adding force into the equation, this is what breaks it and what makes it a lot more like rape. This is why I say that the all leftism is based on rape, because it's this idea that we're going to force you to be good people the way we want you to be, and we're going to use force to do it. This is a forced kind of love. This is not exactly rape, but I'm being a little hyperbolic there, but you get the idea that the left really believes in a coerced kind of love, which is abominable to anyone, and the right really believes in a much more voluntary, and libertarians too. They believe in a more voluntary kind of society.
Yeah, no, this is perfect, man. So like I said, I hope we were to you, to me, it was this conversation was hopefully to you was valuable. It was valuable to me. I hope over time it gains interest to anybody that hears it, and like I said, we didn't get too deep into the laws.
How long have we gone on right now? I can go for another half hour.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I can go for another half hour.
Okay. Well then, because we had our time, but okay, yeah. So what the application of it? So we kind of talked right now about personal, but you can scale that up to different ways. Where have you seen where there's been some of this is unstable, meaning like that your theory does push up against some stuff where it hasn't, like where it's like, yeah, this right here is where it maybe butts up against, or is it, or does the theory always consistent?
It's basically consistent across time and space. It doesn't really, it changes, its form might change a little bit, like the chaos order cycle. Like the players will change, but the meta rules themselves usually the reason I call them laws is they're basically never broken. Something like the first law and the third law, they're basically just logic. They're really just logic. They're never untrue. That the things I assume for them is that power, one, has value. That's pretty obvious and provable, because the government just stole $10 trillion from us last year, and so obviously power has quite a lot of value, and that human hierarchy is basically inevitable. And the reason for that is that it makes everything a lot more efficient, because again, like the monarchy sort of thing, hierarchy just makes it makes everything efficient, and putting the anyway. So those are the only two assumptions I really make, and from those I get like the first law that the value of power is always conserved. That because of that, because you just imagine like if I come to you on the street and I have a knife and I say give me your money. That knife really only has value because I can use it to coerce you. That's the value of power is the value of coercion. And how well can I coerce you? And that is relative to your ability to defend yourself from me. And so if you have martial arts training, I'm pretty sure you do, you might know how to disarm me and take that knife, and then it doesn't have quite much value anymore because you have all this value in yourself. Or if you want to be old school and just pull out a gun, all of a sudden my knife doesn't have much value anymore, and I'm in real trouble. And and so the basically the value of power is it's basically the value of one person aggressing against another is relative to that other person's ability to defend themselves or aggress back.
So our minds then, like in that situation, power dynamics are that component or processing is always running. Then all like it's always on. It's always on. It has to be on because you can die if it's not always running, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this is how we survived an ice age. It was basically predation for 100,000 years. This is predation is built into, like we are the apex predators of apex predators. We're the monsters who put all of the other monsters in cages and look at them with our children at zoos. It's like, that's the kind of monster we are. We are that scary. And of course we're going to do it to each other. And it's like, no duh, it has value. And it's a zero-sum game. It's because by nature it's like it's kind of a ratio. It's like you can think, okay, how valuable if you have two armies, the bigger army usually wins. And because that's the value of power. It's basically a ratio. And That's always percents of 100, and that's it's kind of just logic. And the value of power being subjective, like all value is subjective. You might prefer you might prefer Oreos to Famous Amos cookies. And I might prefer Famous Amos cookies to Oreos, which I do. And I prefer your CBD to another place's CBD. And this is all based on preference. It's all opinion. Value is kind of subject to opinion, and you might not even prefer I might prefer saving my money right now to buying your product, or I might value your product more than my money, and therefore I pay you for it. And you of course value my money more than your product, and this is why it's a win-win. We both get what we want. And so, and it's the same is true of power. A predator has an incentive not to eat his last meal, not to binge himself on every on all of the production and wealth in his society, because if you eat it all, then it's not coming back. It's all gone, and you're going to die. And so a predator has a vested interest in kind of spreading out his meals, so he doesn't eat everything. This is what the government does. They try to balance predation now versus predation later, and they'll show you'll see examples of this.
Because it cannot prey unless it's been produced, which is
basically you have to have production, and so you have to at least wait for the thing to be produced before you can prey on it. So these are basically just logic, and at least those two, and the others about the other four from thermodynamics. I mean, we've seen like thousands of examples of these from every continent, every culture, every religion, every people. And you see them up and down the macro and micro scales. So you see them at really big levels, like and you see them at really small, like kind of like I said about the with like the sixth law. We mentioned that you see it in election cycles. You also see it in great eras of you have some eras are more right wing and more hierarchical than others. This is like the monarchy era. And then you see other eras like ours are more democratic and more again that you see it going back and forth over long periods of time. And again the cycle of history always goes back and forth between oligarchy and monarchy, because for basically the sixth law reason. And this is on a multi-thousand-year time scale. So, and down to like, even if you have a micro scale of like your family, whereas like if you have an overbearing parent, they might have a real degenerate kid, who's a real hedonist. Whereas if you have parents who are really just anything goes, no structure, we don't care. A lot of times they'll have a child who is like, I want some structure, I want some order, and some scheduling and some discipline and yada yada yada, and they have a real stick up their ass. And and you see it all the way at the macro level of nations. You see it all the way down on the micro of just your family, and there's all the that's like just the sixth law, and they basically work everywhere all throughout time for all forms of power. And like the fourth law of archotropism is like you see it. This is why all nations throughout all time have always tried to have to make their borders based on geography, because again, like kind of like having two ocean moats on either side of you makes you really tough to invade. And it's like you have to physically have a warship that can take all of your soldiers over there to actually be able to project power. And because having natural geographic barriers, or like maybe a really big river, because you still have to have a boat to cross the river, and or you have like a big mountain range behind you, and because you can't physically march an army over a mountain, you have to go through a mountain pass somewhere. And and when you do, you're vulnerable because the pass is only so wide and you can't use all of your numbers. This is why 300 Spartans can take on tens of thousands of Persians, because they occupy just a very narrow coastal pass, and they can fight off tens of thousands of Persians for a long, long time until they finally get betrayed by a hunchback with Down syndrome.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the question I had asked about, does it butt up against anything? And you're saying that it doesn't. It mostly, it works every time. Thermodynamics doesn't. So like thermodynamics, those laws and rules and principles don't scale. But they don't scale or not scale. But they don't when it gets
Except
into
for
the
relativity.
quantum world, right? Do these ever go into like, does quantum then mean like more spiritual stuff, or does this have the spiritual and everything in there, or like, or have you even thought of it in that way or something?
Well, the way I say it is that like the quantum world doesn't really have, quantum world and the relativistic worlds, both of these don't really have value to humans because we can't control them.
Okay.
And so that, basically if you're making laws that are only about power, power is something we control. So if you're like, okay, there's
everything else, what's the point?
Yeah, basically everything else is like we don't control it, so it doesn't have value to us, and power only has value if I can control it enough to the point where I can use it to coerce you. So that basically if it doesn't have value to us and we don't control it, then it by nature can't really have value to it, to us. And so that's why I say like it doesn't, it like theoretically it could go that low maybe, but we don't have the capacity to control it right now. So you can't control it, it's not power.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I hear you. So
like I can prove a little bit, like if like with relativity, because there's a criticism that Newton's laws don't quite work well with relativity, with Einstein's relativity. Like we have satellites that are going around the Earth right now, and these are relative. They're going at relativistic speeds where if you have to actually start calculating time dilation, because time and space are relative to each other. And if you're going fast enough, your frame of time is different. And so we have this ability to have relativistic satellites that that have value to us, and we control them. We can use them to spy on other people, or we can just use like spy satellites, or we can use that the like relativity here to make GPS satellites that go around Earth, and they have to be accurate like almost to like the millisecond and the square foot. And if they're not, they don't have value. And GPS is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So these things do actually have value to us. These higher laws of nature like that. If we can control them, they do have value to us. So
so like in well, I'm not one of but like in quantum, the observer is the key, and in here it's can we control it? Can we control it? Is where it's worth more to us. No, this is perfect, man. So we'll conclude with this last question, because I liked when you said it in an interview, and I didn't get to it because we're trying to but get through some stuff. But can you kind of talk about how the state is a luxury good?
Oh yeah. The
concluding here, just to get some controversy out there, to be like, yeah. As anarchists and libertarians, you want to get rid of the state and minimize the state, and you're over here talking all this shit that, hey, vatos, it's a luxury good. What are you guys trying to do over there?
Yeah, I mean just to get a few reasons there. The state it doesn't emerge. It doesn't emerge until, remember, in order to have predation, you have to have production first, and you actually have to have an excess of production, because otherwise you can't afford a state. If you have like 6 guys on a deserted island and you're just barely scraping by, if one of them turns predatory, you're like all 6 of you are dead. Because you just can't afford predators. And basically the point of having a state is, from the state's perspective, is that I just take a little piece, one little bit at a time, and people can plan their lives around that, and they're not bothered. Like, I know the time and day and the amount that I'm going to get robbed every year. It's April 15th, and it's going to be several $1,000s, and I'm going to feel bitter about it for a few days, and then my life will move on. And but I can plan my life and order it around that. Whereas like if I get robbed on the street, I'm like, oh my God, it's like traumatizes me forever, because one is chaos and the other is order. And we prefer the order. Order is universally preferable to chaos. So when you have like a this deserted island or Lord of the Flies, sort of situation where like they're in the real Lord of the Flies, it was like 7 or 8 kids or something like that, and actually they worked together just fine. There were no problems because they couldn't afford problems. And that's the reason why, if any of them have a problem, they're basically all dead. And so they really, and like this is why that you have kind of hunter-gatherer societies that just don't have states, because they physically can't afford it. They are hunter-gatherers. This is why we didn't have states until until the end of the ice age, is because until then we didn't have agriculture, we couldn't afford a state, and we could barely afford to go to war with the neighboring tribe, and that was only when we were really, really, really desperate, and at that point it was all hands on deck. It wasn't like we had one state to go defend us or attack, and while the rest of us kind of sat back and did anything. It was all hands on deck. We're all men, we are all going to war, and that's the way this is going to be. And so when you have like anarchists who will use the real Lord of the Flies story to say that like, oh well, look, I mean, these people didn't kill each other, if we just got rid of state, therefore people wouldn't kill each other. Well, no, because those guys couldn't afford to kill each other, and they couldn't afford to be predatory to each other. And this is actually something you see in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So you have to satisfy the lowest ones first, and then as you get excess, you can start having more and more higher order needs. So like your first order needs are like food, water, shelter, your basic bodily needs. And if you're basically in a hunter-gatherer society, you have too much. You have to spend too much of your time just filling the first column. The second column is the second order of needs is where you get like you have a job, you have an income, you have family, and stuff like that, which are really high order needs. You really do need those. And basically the state is the very last one of those, because that's when you start getting excess production, and that's when and basically the very last of the second layer is where you get the state, because that's when you can afford it. And this is when people can afford to be specialized as predators, and because otherwise they'll kill everybody. Again, predators have they can be forced to be productive. This is not in their nature. And if they were specialized and they had their choice, they would be specialized as as statesmen. And again, you see this with other people that someone might not be very well versed in predation, but they can hire someone who is. And again, just because like your next door neighbor is a peaceful and good to you doesn't mean he's not going to go vote to take your shit. And it's like, well, if there is no voting system, well, then he might not. He might still want to take your shit. Because he'll find some way to pay someone to go do it for him. This is why the state exists, is because not only are there predators out there that are specialized to be apex predators against other humans. There are people out there who want to hire those predators and get some value for it. This is this is why we tax the rich to feed everybody else. It's and there's a lot of people who believe that's like a third of the country really believes in going out and hiring these apex predators that we call the state to go aggress against the really productive people in society and take their shit. And so I mean, this is why I can't buy more of your wonderful CBD, which I really, really love. And if I weren't being taxed, because I have a fairly decent income, and I get to kiss a good third of it goodbye every single year. And I really hate it, and I know it's going to some bum who can't do anything for me. And, it's just, and that bum really feels like he's getting his values worth, because he's getting a lot more than he paid for, because he probably didn't pay anything. And, and there are a lot of people out there who are, willing to pay for that and support that and, aid that along and try to give moral cover to it. And because it's in their benefit. And so but again, for that to happen, that's at least a third of society, because that's the left. The left is about a third of society. If you want to have an anarchy, what are you going to do about it? It's like you can't just say that, oh, well, they're extremely aggressive right now, always have been. And, but in an anarchy, they'll just be peaceful and be productive. And, it's like, no, it's like, I don't know where you would possibly get that from. Like they really want this, and they really believe they have a right to take your shit. So,
so last mini question here, because it was on the last on my list, and I just wanted to get your take on it. Is why do the bankers always win?
Because they can, because interest rates are not subject to the normal laws of nature; they're only subject to the laws of math. So whenever you have a normal economic growth that kind of follows something like an S curve, like your business is going along, it's growing kind of at a slower rate, And then eventually, yeah, you hit a real critical mass and you start growing really, really fast. And it's called vertical growth. And as you get mass adoption, and then that period kind of wanes and you start going a little sideways again and it gets slower growth. And so when you have that happen, like kind of like farming is the classic example where, you plant the seed and you have really low growth for a while. And then, the crop is matured and you're ready to harvest it and you get lots of wealth income right there. And then you go back to just the planting season, which doesn't really do much. And that's an S curve. This is what we had for thousands of years with even like 6,000 years ago. We had farmers who knew about this economic cycle. And the problem is with the bankers, because it's a solid 3% a year, it just compounds and compounds and compounds and compounds. It doesn't have that S curve effect. Like the interest rate doesn't on your loan or whatever is fixed. It doesn't go like 1%, 1%, 1%, 3%, 3%, and then like 1%, 1%, 1% again. It doesn't do that. And it's like the amount of debt you can owe just compounds and compounds over time. And because of that, the bankers are not subject to the normal rules of economic growth, and they can be immune to the business cycle effectively. And so what would happen all throughout human history is that whoever the money lenders are, this is, there's a bank, you're in the business of lending. Whoever the money lenders are, they would always, eventually run out of people to make loans to, because some people don't need the loans. They have enough saved and they don't believe in debt because they know it's bad for them, et cetera, et cetera. And they're like, and the bankers say to themselves, well, we can't, make loans to these people because they won't voluntarily accept us. So what they do is they go make loans to their government to say that, okay, we're going to, give you, Mr. King Sovereign, a loan to do whatever you want. And then and because the king can just go tax everybody and just pass the cost of the debt onto the people who didn't want to take the debt. And, in the form of taxes, he just passes that debt on to them. So it's as if they, indebted a whole nation of people to themselves when really all they did was indebt one king who can just tax everybody, or the government for itself. If you're a republic, same thing. And so what always ends up happening is that eventually the sovereign just gets himself way too far into debt, or the republic gets themselves way too far into debt, and they can't pay it back, and they start wanting to default on their debts. And what always ends up happening is the bankers will then say, okay, well, now this asshole is going to default on us to a whole lot of money, so we're going to go to his next door neighbor, give him a loan that he can go use as in his war chest to go to war with the king who's indebted to us. And war is extremely expensive, and and then maybe that king comes back and say, okay, maybe I can pay you back after all, and I need another loan to fight off my new invader. And so no matter who wins no matter who wins the war, they bankers still have a sovereign that owes that, a king who owes them a ton of money and now has a ton of territory that he can pay it with. And a lot of times, at the end of a war, in order to pay for the king to, for the victorious king to pay his debts, he just loots the entire country and, of all the people in their wealth, and takes everything from them in order to repay his debts to the people he took money from, or that he took a loan from. And so no matter what, the bankers always get their money. The bankers will always win because they can do stuff like this, and they end up being immune to the business cycle.
Do then, and the reason it was my last question was because do the bankers then play archetropism like for fun?
Well, I mean, again,
meaning they look at a world map or this, and they play it differently because they, I'm trying to ask a little bit, right?
Yeah. And they have the same set of incentives because, again, wealth is power, and they can definitely see that that there's a chaos and order cycle, and there's something that they can profit from, because again, profit is power, and they can see that the rates of things change over time because interest rates are all about time preference. This is something they can see very, very easily, and they have an incentive to say, okay, how can we get our most money back? And sometimes that involves war. And sometimes that involves conquest. If you have a Middle Eastern dictator or two that decide that okay, we don't really want to be on the petrodollar system, we want to accept other currencies for oil instead of, the US dollar, then all of a sudden that really threatens the bankers' interests. And they're going to say that, okay, perhaps we need to invade this, Saddam Hussein, who doesn't want to use the petrodollar, or, Muammar Gaddafi, who, doesn't want to use the petrodollar anymore. Perhaps he really needs to be invaded by the world hegemon for no particular reason. And that's kind of what happens.
Yeah. I've heard you mention it sometimes, and my wife and I, we liked Game of Thrones, and I remember when I don't remember a lot of I remember a lot of it, but I just remember when whatever those
Iron Bank.
Yeah, when they went to it, then I remember just sitting back and being like, oh, these motherfuckers. I already knew the bankers were there. Everybody's subject to the banks or in that way, and
And Game of Thrones was just based off of European history. Like William the Conqueror was Daenerys. He came from France to invade Britain, and with the barbarian hordes, the Vikings, and the White Walkers are a symbol of climate change and all the ice that they got in northern England, and then the houses there's like the house of the Tudors. That's like they're like the not the Baratheons. What is it? The Lannisters. They're House Lannister because they were basically fucking their siblings, and it's all European history, and this is where that comes from, and like the king in the north is like the king of Scotland, and because Scotland's to the north of London, and London's in the south. It's nice and warm near the Thames River, which King's Landing also had a river and all that, and. Yeah, this is it's all European history. We're fascinated with it. It's all real stuff, and the banks give loans to both sides, and they end up winning.
So then, moving forward, I guess, and to conclude a little bit here, there's been, discussions about like what some players are trying to do with the Libertarian Party or join the Republican Party and all that stuff, and I like to. I've even been someone that's, that in the past have said like, through the Ron Paul campaign, we were trying to become delegates and all this shit. And then I remember there was like an election for like the electors there, like at the Republican Party. And I remember even at that moment, I was like, why the fuck are we trying to be like going to the convention? I was like, why don't we learn how to play the game to just be electors? You can just like vote for the actual. So I like to be efficient and like let's get to the point. Is there a place to say in our circles to say like, hey, we need to start learning the banking language, the banking systems, and get into those games, or is that just another world that we don't need?
I mean, the thing we really need most is the leadership game, because the libertarian movement does not have leaders, and the part of the problem for that is you have a movement of people who don't want leaders. It's like you have a leaderless movement that does it, because you have a whole bunch of people who do not demand leaders. See, normally people, human beings want leaders. They want people to, kind of help them and guide them. And, again, hierarchy makes things efficient. And like kind of like your family, you're in charge, and this is kind of what makes it efficient. Is you have the accountability, and you have the decision making power and the responsibility. And unfortunately, you have a lot of people who kind of want to do that. All of them want to do that for themselves to one degree or another. And you have a movement here of people who don't want leaders. And no wonder you have a leaderless, headless movement that can't go anywhere because it's not efficient, because it can't do hierarchy well, because they don't have leaders. And that's the number one thing holding libertarians back. And the reason why socialists, the socialists win because they want leaders, and they're good with that. They're fine with hierarchy. Turns out, even though they want equality, they understand the principle of organization around a leader. And the libertarians just don't have that. They don't have that demand, and they think they're superior for not wanting a leader. Really, they're a lot more inefficient because of it. And
life is funny, right? Life is funny.
If they were willing to defer gratification a little and take one for the team and just say that guy's the leader, he's in charge, you probably have a lot more results. Particularly if he's good at his job. He might not be good at his job, but he still might get more done.
Yeah,
that's the main thing holding the libertarians back, is they don't have leaders and they don't want them.
Yeah, no, I hear you, man, and I like to just step back and just watch it all, but be the king of my household, because it's really all I can control. Like you said, right? Just take care of what you could control. And for anybody out there in the audience that liked our conversation, please, like I said, we didn't get too deep into the laws, but really Andrew explains them better on his podcast, the Popular Liberty podcast. He goes into each one. So I recommend you check that out. And Andrew, I hope that you had a good time here, and I'd love to get you back on, and we can talk.
Carlos, I'd love to be back on whenever you'll have me.
Okay, perfect. So where could people reach you? Where can they find you? And then and anything you might have coming in the future, please let everybody know, and we'll wrap up.
Right now, I am at Popular Liberty _ on Twitter, and you can find me at in the part of the Problem Inner Circle on MeWe. I'm the top admin, and you can also find me on YouTube at just regular Popular Space Liberty, and you can find my writing on antilibertarian.substack.com. And again, doesn't mean I'm anti-libertarian. It means that, it's kind of a libertarian with anti-hero virtues instead of heroic virtues. Like a libertarian is to an anti-libertarian the way a hero is to an anti-hero. And I named it that so I can tell who's read the blog and who hasn't, because that's literally at the headline. So if you haven't read my blog and you're like, he's anti-libertarian, it's like, well, I know you haven't read what I wrote, so I can just block you. And my blocking policy on Twitter is inspired by Michael Malice.
There you go. All right, perfect, man. So thank you, and we'll plan on having you back, and appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Carlos.
Peace, man.